right, it looks like we are live and ready to go. Got about 4 minutes till the session starts, so I'm going to put myself on mute for a minute, and then we'll get going. All right, so I got the screen share up. I'm testing out the chat functionality here real quick to see if anybody can see me on the chat. All right. Seems like the chat's going pretty good on LinkedIn, so that's good. And we are 1 minute out till start time, and I am hopeful that everything will run smoothly today. All right, I'm going to give people 1 more minute to jump on. Okay, everybody, it seems like we're having just a few issues on LinkedIn getting it to connect to the event platform there. So I do apologize about that. LinkedIn doesn't seem to want to play nice with the integration software. So I'm just going to plug a comment in here for people to please switch over to the live event on my profile. Because we're having some integration issues. Okay, and I will get started here. So first and foremost, thank you everybody for joining me. I really appreciate the time. One of my clients came to me with a question, and the question was really around, hey, Phil, what makes an interest rate a good interest rate versus a bad interest rate? I thought that was a wonderful question. I thought a lot of people probably wanted to know, like, hey, what is a good interest rate? What is a bad interest rate? And maybe a little bit about how I think about the difference between those things. So I told them I'd put together the presentation and I'd share it out with everybody as well, because at the end of the day, I think this is good info for people to have. So anyways, continuing on, I'm just gonna dive into these slides over here real quick. So this is a quick disclaimer. Please just take everything as is. This is for educational purposes. This is not supposed to be like personal financial advice in any way, shape, or form. Everybody's situation is unique and distinct. And so this is just intended to be educational and for you to get like a glimpse into how I think about these things and some of the considerations I have. All right, so moving right along. So my agenda, go over a quick introduction. Why are interest rates important? What is interest, right? There's some confusion about that. And then types of interest and, how to determine if an interest rate is good, bad, or, otherwise indifferent. So here we go. And it seems like people are starting to join in. Sorry again about the LinkedIn issue, but if you guys want to, just throw something in the chat if you have any questions. Unfortunately, the streaming platform I use doesn't allow people to like actually come on camera. So that goes for people on YouTube as well. Just jump in, type away, and be happy to answer any questions as they come up. All right, so about me and my firm, we serve service members, veterans, and their families, and we pride ourselves on providing financial advice that is both accessible and quality, or of a high quality. This is a big issue when it comes to the veteran community, service members. We just don't have access or as much access as some other communities do. So I really wanted to focus on that. A little bit about me. Spent 7.5 years in the military. Went to University of Florida, got my undergrad degree in finance, got my MBA, studied finance, went to work at a couple Fortune 500 companies, J&J and IBM, and now this is me living my best life. So I'm really happy with what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep doing it. So why are interest rates important? Great question, and I wanted to start off with an example of what an average house costs today versus what an average house cost about 2.5 years ago. So today, average house, sticker price, just under $490,000. Current average market interest rates for a mortgage, just over 7.5%. The term of a mortgage, it's paid monthly over 30 years. Typically, people get a 30-year fixed mortgage. So this is what I'm using in this example. So 360 months. The interest expense on that, forward looking here, is almost $750,000. So the total cost of a mortgage today is really going to be about $1.2 million on an average house. But what did that look like a couple years ago? Well, a couple years ago, and just using the same sticker price to do an apples to apples comparison, but you paid only $273,000 in interest expense because your interest rate was on average 3.22% there. And so I just wanted to point out here that you've got a situation where your total cost in this lower interest rate environment is only slightly higher than the interest expense alone in our current interest rate environment. And so just to highlight some of those differences, even though you've got the same price in the same term with an interest rate that's just, 4.366% higher, you're paying about $475,000 more money over the life of that loan, or in percentage terms, 62.6% more. So even though, you might say to yourself, oh, what's, 4 point something percent? Well, it translates into a lot of dollars and cents at the end of the day. And so I just really want to make sure that people understand, like, hey, what's going on with that? Why is it like that? All right, so moving right along, and hopefully that helps paint the picture of why this is important. Okay, so what is interest, right? And so I have two different definitions from two different perspectives, and hopefully this will kind of paint the picture as to why interest is important, or what interest is, rather. So a charge for borrowed money, right? Interest is always attached to debt in some way, right? So from the perspective of the lendee, which is essentially the person or entity that's receiving the loan, it's what I'm paying for the privilege to borrow that money. Okay. On the flip side of that equation, if I am the lender or the person extending that loan, I'm really thinking about interest in terms of the profit that I receive for allowing somebody to have access to my money, and to use it as they see fit, right? So same concept, it's just two sides of the same coin. So when you're thinking about like what interest is, it's always tied to some form of debt, right? Credit cards, home loans, automobile loans. When you deposit money to the bank, technically you're lending that money to the bank, right? They owe you that money back, right? There's a contract between you two that stipulates you will give me that money back when I want it, and they're going to pay interest on that amount that you've deposited. So types of interest, fixed interest. So often associated with home loans, it stays the same or stays fixed over the life of the loan. Variable interest rate fluctuates over the life of the loan. It's often benchmarked to some rate like LIBOR, even though that's fallen out of good graces. And then they'll tack on like a certain percentage over it. So as the benchmark rate fluctuates, your variable interest loan will fluctuate, but there's always going to be some premium on top of that, so that the lender has some protection of risk when it comes to that interest rate. All right. Let's see. Next up, we have annual percentage rate, or APR, an interest rate that has been normalized to the effective annual rate to help people compare loans. This is important because a lot of institutions used to do this simple interest rate, but it would be devoid of how often they're compounding that rate. And in the absence of the compounding rate, they don't have any way to basically say, well, how good is this interest rate versus that interest rate? Because it's not an actual apples to apples comparison. So like I'll use credit cards as an example. You might have like a simple interest rate of 10%. But if it's compounded daily, the annual percentage rate actually ends up being like 10.5% roughly, right? Because they're compounding it every day over the course of that whole year. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau essentially forces financial institutions to state somewhere what their APR is, or their annual percentage rate, so that the consumers have a good apples to apples comparison of what that is. Let's see here. And then next up, accrued or compound interest, kind of alluded to that a little bit before, but accrued interest, I'll use student loans as an example. If you don't pay on your student loans, that interest that you owed is going to get accrued to the principal. In next month, the interest expense is going to go up. Even though the interest rate hasn't changed, the principal that interest applies to is now greater because last month's interest accrued or accumulated to the principal, and therefore you end up having this ever expanding debt obligation, right? Now, it also works in reverse. Let's say you've got money at a bank, high yield savings account, money market fund, FDIC insured, and you don't pull that interest out and you leave it in there. Well, now the bank owes you interest not just on the initial deposit, but also owes you interest on that increased amount that you left in there. And that's super important. So one of my favorite little tidbits there by Albert Einstein: compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. Love that quote. Is a rate good or bad, right? The answer is it depends, right? There's no such thing as a good or bad interest rate in and of itself. But I wanted to share some things that I think people ought to consider when they're thinking about interest rates associated with loans, whether they're giving them or receiving them, right? Number one, like, can you afford it? Can you afford the interest payments and the principal payments on that loan, right? And so the key question there is, do you have a budget to understand, what your costs are associated with that, right? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know what their budget is, and they don't really understand how much debt they can take on. Okay. Finally, what risks do you assume, right? Does the interest rate fluctuate? Can the loan be called in by the lender, right? Like that's a huge thing, right? If you think to yourself, oh, I've got all these years to pay off the loan, and then the bank says, no, we're going to need all that principal back now because you have breached some terms in this contract that allow us to call the loan. Or maybe in the original loan document, it said that they could call the loan. Well, you need to be able to have some way to produce the cash to pay off that loan in that situation. And so that fine print becomes very important because you're assuming that risk as the person who's taking on the loan, right? And so that could really take something that, even though there's a good interest rate, the terms of the loan could be so awful that it doesn't make sense, right? And obviously, can the lender put a lien on your property, right? So there's pros and cons to that. One of the reasons that mortgages have such low interest rates compared to other types of loan is because the bank gets to put a lien against your house. So if you don't pay, they can repossess your house. Same thing with car loan, right? A little bit different with a credit card, right? It's not clear what property they can put a lien on. And so that process looks different. And as a result, they tend to charge a higher interest rate. Are there better alternatives? At the end of the day, loans are financial products, and financial products are commodities. The only thing that's different from one loan to the next are the terms of the loan and the interest rate. If those things are identical, the loan's identical. It's a commodity, right? So I always encourage people to shop around and look for the best terms and the best rates on loans, because it doesn't matter outside of that. It's just a contract between you and another entity. The only other consideration you might concern yourself with is that other entity that I'm getting a loan from or extending a loan to, Are they credit worthy, right? Am I going to get my money back, right? Are they going to pay me? That's obviously a big concern, but not something I think maybe most people, or at least a lot of people, think about when they're going out and either giving or getting loans. Finally, financing for income versus consumption. I would argue a loan that you take on that you believe is going to increase your revenue, profits, or income in some way creates a positive feedback loop and is therefore inherently better than a loan that you take on for the purposes of consumption, which by its nature creates a negative feedback loop. So I'll give you two examples, right? If I go and get a student loan to go to college, which then increases my income, that's created a positive upward trajectory, right? I financed the cost of my education to improve my income. Now in the future, I have more income, which allows me to pay off that loan. And then I have extra income on top of it, to improve my quality of life, invest in other ventures, that sort of thing, right? Financing for consumption. If I take out, a $50,000 loan to go buy a brand new pickup truck, well, that brand new pickup truck depreciates in value. It has a limited life. And so at the end of the day, I've financed consumption. And when that thing is done being consumed, I no longer have anything to show for it, right? I have exhausted the life of the vehicle and I paid extra money for it because I chose to finance it, right? And there's no real upside there that I could think of. Now, clearly, some people need to take out loans to buy vehicles. I think that's a good thing. So I'm not trying to knock anybody who goes out and gets a car loan because they need to have transportation. I'm just saying that if you're comparing, one option versus another when it comes to financing for income versus financing for consumption, you would think to yourself, okay, I'd rather take out a loan to improve my income than take out a loan that's just going to get consumed and I won't have anything to show for it at the end of the day. Okay, so wanted to show you just some current rates just for benchmarking purposes. I got this off of the Wall Street Journal. They always have updated rates here with what's going on, right? So current year, 30-year mortgage fixed rate was last at 7.24%, right? So that's pretty high compared to what we're used to. Another thing that I like people to pay attention to is that car loan, 7.86%, right? Also a little bit higher than we're used to. But as time goes on, I really do think we're going to end up in a situation where people, really have to adjust to this new interest rate environment because it's just not as good as it used to be. I think we all got a little bit spoiled. And so here we are, and that's that. Even though the Fed does say that they're thinking about lowering interest rates potentially later this year, a lot of economists seem to believe that. So range is hot. Feel free to ask me anything. I like to leave a little time at the end of these presentations for people to literally ask me anything. If you've got a question on interest rates, a question about me, anything like that, I just ask that you put it in the chat room or in the chat, and I will do my best to answer those as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. So I'm gonna put myself on mute, and please feel free to ask me anything. Thanks so much. Oh, and also the QR code on the screen, I believe takes you to my website, or if you just want to have a one-on-one conversation with me, feel free to scan that QR code on your screen and set up some time with me. Well, it does seem that people are feeling awfully shy today, so no problem. Thanks so much for joining me. Thanks so much for watching. Feel free to send me a message if you do have some questions later on. If you don't, that's fine. I love fielding questions, but check out my website. Let me know if you've got some topic you'd like to know more about. Would love to hear from everybody. And hopefully, I can get this LinkedIn issue with Restream resolved because they are not playing nice together. And I don't know why, despite my best efforts. So I do apologize about that. Beg you for your forgiveness. And I hope that you all enjoy the week and take care.